The burgundy wool coat felt heavier than it should have as I lifted it from the closet, my hands trembling with grief that still felt raw after 3 weeks. Ryan had worn this coat to every important meeting, every client dinner, every moment when he wanted to project success and confidence. Now it was just another item to sort through, another piece of the life we'd built together that needed to be packed away or donated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when the paramedics couldn't locate his emergency contacts that night. I should have questioned why his phone was password protected in ways I'd never seen before, why certain calls made him step outside, why business trips seemed to multiply in the months before the heart attack took him at 34. But grief has a way of making you focus on what you've lost rather than what you never actually had. The coat pocket crinkled as I folded it, and instinctively I reached inside to check for forgotten tissues or receipts. My fingers closed around something unexpected. A small envelope, cream-colored and expensive, the kind used for wedding invitations or formal announcements. My name was written across the front in handwriting I didn't recognize, elegant script that spelled out Mrs. Claire Walsh in deep blue ink. Inside was a single photograph and a brief note. The photo showed Ryan at what appeared to be a company holiday party, his arm around a striking brunette in a red dress. They were both wearing wedding rings, and she was obviously pregnant. The woman was laughing at something he'd whispered in her ear, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, while his fingers traced her shoulder with unmistakable intimacy. The note was brief but devastating. "Claire, I thought you should know the truth about who your husband really was. Ryan and I were together for 2 years. Our daughter Emma was born last month. He promised he'd leave you after the holidays. I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm sorrier for mine. Natalie Harper." The photograph fluttered to the floor as my legs gave out beneath me. I found myself sitting on our bedroom carpet, surrounded by the remnants of what I'd thought was my perfect marriage, staring at evidence that the man I'd mourned for 3 weeks had been living an entirely different life. The grief that had consumed me suddenly transformed into something much more complex, a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and a strange sense of relief that I wasn't losing my mind after all. Those late nights he'd claimed were spent working on the Riverside development project suddenly made sense. The unexplained charges on our credit card that he'd dismissed as business expenses took on new meaning. The way he'd grown distant in recent months, blaming stress and deadlines for his distraction, now revealed itself as the calculated deception it had been. I'd attributed his behavioral changes to the pressure of expanding his real estate business, never imagining that the expansion included an entirely separate family. I picked up the photograph again, studying every detail with the desperate intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. The woman, Natalie, was beautiful, in an understated way that made her seem approachable and genuine. She didn't look like the stereotypical other woman from movies and novels. There was something wholesome about her smile, something that suggested she believed she was the legitimate relationship while I was the complication. The timestamp on the photo showed it was taken just 2 months ago at what appeared to be his company's annual Christmas party, an event he'd told me was canceled due to budget cuts. The baby, Emma. Ryan had a daughter he'd never mentioned, a child who would grow up without ever knowing her father. I found myself wondering if Natalie knew about me, or if she'd discovered my existence only after his death. The formal tone of her note suggested she was trying to maintain dignity in an impossible situation, reaching out not to hurt me further, but to share a burden that had become too heavy to carry alone. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Lauren Kim, asking how I was managing the difficult task of going through Ryan's belongings. I stared at the message, unable to formulate a response that could encompass what I'd just discovered. How do you explain to someone that the person you're grieving never actually existed? That the marriage you've been mourning was built on a foundation of lies so complete that you're questioning every memory, every moment of happiness, every declaration of love? The practical implications began to sink in as the initial shock wore off. If Ryan had been supporting another family, where had the money come from? Our joint accounts showed regular deposits from his real estate business, but now I wondered if there were other accounts I didn't know about. Had he taken out life insurance policies that listed Natalie as a beneficiary? Were there legal complications I hadn't considered? The thought of having to share my husband's estate with his secret family felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in cautionary tales. not to me in my carefully planned life. I found myself standing and walking to Ryan's home office, a room I'd rarely entered during our marriage because he'd claimed it was too cluttered and disorganized for anyone else to navigate. Now I wondered what I might find if I actually looked. His desk was surprisingly neat, with files organized in a system that made sense once I started exploring. There was a locked drawer I'd never noticed before, and after 20 minutes of searching, I found the key taped underneath the desk lamp. Inside the drawer was a second phone I'd never seen before, along with a stack of documents that painted a picture of deception so thorough it took my breath away. Bank statements for accounts in his name only, showing regular transfers to someone named N. Harper. Lease agreements for an apartment across town that he'd signed as co-tenant with the same N. Harper. Medical bills related to prenatal care and delivery, with Ryan listed as the father and emergency contact. A birth certificate for Emma Rose Harper Walsh, dated just 6 weeks ago. The second phone held text messages that read like a love story between two people planning a future together. Ryan's messages to Natalie were tender and excited, full of plans for their daughter's first Christmas and discussions about when he'd finally leave his, quote, complicated situation to be with them full-time. He'd been promising Natalie for months that he was going to tell me about their relationship after the holidays, that he just needed to find the right way to minimize the damage to everyone involved. Reading through their correspondence was like watching a movie about someone else's life, except the someone else was supposedly my husband. He'd told Natalie that our marriage had been over emotionally for years, that we were more like roommates than spouses, that he'd stayed out of convenience and financial entanglement rather than love. He described me as cold and career-focused, someone who wouldn't be devastated by the end of our relationship because I was too absorbed in my work as a graphic designer to notice his absence. The cruelest part was how different he sounded in these messages compared to how he'd been with me. With Natalie, he was romantic and attentive, sending good morning texts and sharing details about his day. With me, he'd become increasingly distant and perfunctory, claiming exhaustion when I'd try to initiate conversations about our relationship or our future. I'd blamed myself for the growing gap between us, wondering if I was indeed too focused on work, too demanding, too something that had driven him away. Now I understood that he'd been deliberately creating distance to make room for his real life with his real family. The apartment lease revealed the extent of his deception. He'd been maintaining 2 households for over a year, which explained the financial stress he'd mentioned in recent months. The apartment was in a nice neighborhood, the kind of place where a young family might feel safe and comfortable. I found myself imagining Natalie there, pregnant and alone whenever Ryan was with me, believing his promises that soon they'd be together permanently. Among the papers was a draft of a letter addressed to me, dated just a week before his heart attack. In it, Ryan had finally attempted to explain his double life, though his words felt inadequate and self-serving even in death. He'd written about falling in love unexpectedly, about not knowing how to untangle himself from our marriage without destroying both relationships. He'd claimed to love both of us in different ways, though his actions suggested he'd chosen Natalie and Emma as his priority while keeping me as a safety net. The letter contained an apology that felt hollow, acknowledging that his choices had been selfish and cowardly, but stopping short of taking full responsibility for the pain he was about to cause. He'd written about his fears of losing everything if he was honest, about the complexity of dividing assets and starting over at 34. Most painfully, he described feeling trapped by his own deception, unable to come clean because too much time had passed and too many lies had been told. As I sat in his office surrounded by evidence of his double life, I realized that grief wasn't the primary emotion I was feeling anymore. Instead, there was a strange sense of clarity, as if puzzle pieces I hadn't even known were missing were finally falling into place. The emotional distance I'd felt from Ryan in recent months hadn't been my imagination or my failure as a wife. His distraction and irritability hadn't been work stress. The growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong in our relationship had been accurate, even when I'd tried to dismiss it as paranoia or insecurity. I called Lauren without fully planning what I'd say, needing to voice the impossible situation to someone who knew me well enough to help me process it. Her reaction moved through the same stages I'd experienced: disbelief, shock, anger, and finally a protective fury on my behalf that felt both comforting and overwhelming. She offered to come over immediately, to help me confront this situation, but I found myself asking for space instead. I needed time to absorb the full scope of Ryan's deception before I could begin planning my next steps. That night, I couldn't sleep in the bed I'd shared with Ryan, knowing now that his mind had been elsewhere for months, possibly years. Instead, I sat in our living room with the photograph of Ryan and Natalie on the coffee table before me, studying their faces for clues I might have missed. They looked genuinely happy together, the kind of couple you'd see in advertisements for life insurance or family vacations. There was none of the forced quality that had crept into my recent photos with Ryan, no sense of people going through the motions of affection. The most disturbing realization was that Ryan's death had probably devastated Natalie far more than it had devastated me. She'd lost the father of her newborn daughter, the man she believed was preparing to fully commit to their relationship, her partner in building what she thought would be their permanent life together. Meanwhile, I'd been mourning a man who had already emotionally left our marriage, grieving for a relationship that had been hollow for months without my full awareness. I found myself wondering about Natalie's current situation. Was she struggling financially without Ryan's support? Did she have family to help with the baby? Was she dealing with her own grief while trying to care for a newborn alone? Despite my anger at the deception, I couldn't help feeling a complicated sympathy for her position. She'd been lied to as well, promised a future that Ryan's death had made impossible, left alone to raise their daughter without the partner she'd been counting on. The practical questions began to multiply as the shock wore off. Did I have any legal obligations to Ryan's secret family? Should I contact Natalie directly to discuss the situation? Were there assets I needed to protect or divide? The life insurance policy that would help me pay off our mortgage had seemed like a blessing when I'd received it, but now I wondered if similar policies existed with Natalie as the beneficiary. The thought of potentially having to fight for resources with a grieving mother and newborn baby made me feel sick. By morning, I'd made several decisions. First, I would contact a lawyer to understand my legal position and obligations. Second, I would reach out to Natalie to arrange a meeting where we could discuss the situation honestly and determine how to move forward. Third, I would stop grieving for a marriage that had already ended before Ryan's death, and start focusing on reclaiming my own life from the deception that had surrounded it. The photograph remained on my coffee table as I prepared for what would undoubtedly be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. But for the first time since finding that coat pocket revelation, I felt something other than shock and betrayal.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I felt determined to face the truth completely, no matter how painful, and to make decisions based on reality rather than the illusion I'd been living in for longer than I wanted to admit. As I dressed for my appointment with the lawyer Lauren had recommended, I caught sight of myself in the bedroom mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me seemed different somehow, as if discovering Ryan's deception had stripped away more than just my naive trust in our marriage. There was a clarity in my expression that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose that felt both frightening and liberating. I was about to step into a version of my life I'd never imagined, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward, rather than standing still in confusion and doubt. The law office felt cold and sterile as I sat across from attorney Margaret Summers, a woman whose reputation for handling complex estate matters had come highly recommended by Lauren. The stack of documents I'd brought seemed insignificant on her mahogany desk, but I knew they represented the complete unraveling of everything I'd believed about my life. Margaret reviewed each paper with professional detachment while I struggled to maintain my composure. "Mrs. Walsh, I need you to understand that this situation is more complicated than a typical estate settlement," Margaret said, removing her reading glasses and setting them aside. "Your husband maintained separate financial obligations that could affect your inheritance rights. The child he fathered creates legitimate claims against his estate, regardless of the circumstances of her birth." The word inheritance struck me as absurd. How could I inherit from someone who had stolen so much from me already? The house we'd bought together, the savings we'd accumulated, the retirement accounts we'd planned to use for our future, all of it had been built while he was systematically deceiving me and supporting another family. The thought of Natalie Harper having legal rights to assets I'd helped create felt like a continuation of Ryan's betrayal beyond the grave. What exactly does that mean for me financially? I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know the full extent of the damage Ryan had done to my security. Margaret pulled out a calculator and began working through numbers that made my stomach clench. Based on these bank statements, your husband was transferring approximately $3,000 monthly to Ms. Harper. The apartment lease shows he was responsible for rent and utilities totaling another $1,800. Medical bills, baby expenses, and other costs. We're looking at roughly $6,000 per month in undisclosed obligations. $6,000. That explained so much about our recent financial tensions. Ryan had been complaining about cash flow problems with his real estate business, suggesting we postpone the kitchen renovation I'd been planning and delay our talks about starting a family of our own. Meanwhile, he'd been fully funding a separate household and preparing for fatherhood with someone else entirely. The life insurance policy you mentioned pays out $400,000, Margaret continued. However, if there's a second policy with Ms. Harper as beneficiary, and if she can prove financial dependency, she may have grounds to claim a portion of your settlement as well. We need to conduct a thorough search of all insurance policies and financial accounts. The meeting lasted 2 hours and left me feeling more overwhelmed than when I'd arrived. Margaret had given me a list of documents to gather, accounts to investigate, and people to contact. The process of untangling Ryan's deception would take months and potentially cost thousands in legal fees. More disturbingly, she'd advised me to prepare for the possibility that my financial security was far more precarious than I'd realized. Walking back to my car, I called in sick to work for the rest of the week. The graphic design firm where I'd worked for 5 years felt like part of my old life now, the life where I'd been married to a man I'd thought I knew. My colleagues had been supportive during my bereavement leave, sending flowers and offering to cover my projects, but how could I explain that I wasn't actually grieving anymore? That relief was beginning to overshadow sorrow as I understood how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. That afternoon, I drove to the apartment address I'd found in Ryan's papers. The building was modern and expensive, the kind of place young professionals aspired to live when they were building careers and starting families. I sat in my car across the street for nearly an hour, wondering if Natalie was inside, perhaps looking out at the same street I was watching, dealing with her own grief while caring for their baby alone. Finally, I gathered the courage to approach the building and press the buzzer for apartment 3B. The voice that answered was tired and cautious, understandably wary of unexpected visitors during what had to be an incredibly difficult time for her. Ms. Harper, this is Claire Walsh. I received your note, and I think we need to talk. The silence that followed stretched so long I wondered if she'd hung up, but eventually the door buzzed open. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt endless, and I found myself rehearsing conversations that seemed inadequate for the complexity of our situation. How do you introduce yourself to your dead husband's secret partner? What tone do you take when discussing a betrayal that affected both of you differently but equally devastatingly? Natalie Harper opened her apartment door looking exactly as she had in the photograph, except exhaustion had replaced the radiant happiness I'd seen in her smile. She was still beautiful, but in the way of someone who hadn't been sleeping well and was managing stress that would challenge anyone. The baby crying in the background explained at least part of her fatigue. I wasn't sure you'd actually come, she said, stepping aside to let me enter an apartment that was tastefully decorated but clearly showing the chaos of new parenthood. Baby items were scattered across surfaces, and the kitchen counter was covered with bottles and formula containers. I wasn't sure I would either, I admitted, taking in details that painted a picture of the life Ryan had been living when he wasn't with me. Framed photos on the side table showed him and Natalie at various locations around Portland, restaurants I'd never been to, hiking trails I didn't recognize, a beach weekend that must have happened when he'd told me he was visiting clients in Seattle. Emma was indeed beautiful, with dark hair that matched her mother's and blue eyes that were unmistakably Ryan's. Holding her seemed to calm Natalie, and I watched as she settled into a routine that spoke of weeks spent learning to manage alone. The baby looked healthy and content, clearly being well cared for despite the difficult circumstances. I need you to know that I didn't know about you until after the funeral, Natalie said, her voice careful and measured. Ryan told me he'd been divorced for over a year, that you'd kept the house temporarily for financial reasons, but were living separate lives. He showed me divorce papers that I now realize must have been fabricated. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Ryan hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd created an elaborate fiction about our marriage being over to justify his relationship with Natalie. She'd been living her life believing she was with a single man who was free to commit to her and their daughter. In her mind, she'd been the legitimate relationship while I was the complication from his past. He never mentioned being married in any of his conversations? I asked, though I could see from her expression that she was telling the truth. Never. He talked about an ex-wife who'd been difficult during the divorce proceedings, someone who was career-focused and hadn't wanted children. He said you'd grown apart because you had different goals for the future. Natalie shifted Emma to her other arm, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation but determined to be honest. I'm so sorry, Claire. If I'd known the truth, I would never have. You don't need to apologize, I interrupted, surprising myself with how much I meant it. You were lied to, just as much as I was. Maybe more, because you're dealing with the consequences alone now. We talked for 3 hours while Emma alternated between sleeping and eating, and gradually a picture emerged of how thoroughly Ryan had deceived us both. He'd told Natalie that his irregular schedule was due to client demands and property inspections. The nights he'd spent at home with me were explained to her as business trips or family obligations he couldn't avoid. He'd maintained 2 complete lives with such precision that neither of us had suspected the other's existence. Natalie showed me text messages that revealed a man I barely recognized. Someone attentive and romantic and completely present in ways he hadn't been with me for months. He'd sent her good morning messages every day, shared photos of properties he was showing, asked about her pregnancy symptoms, and doctor's appointments. Meanwhile, our communication had dwindled to logistical discussions about schedules and household maintenance. Did he seem stressed to you in the last few weeks? I asked, thinking about the letter he'd been drafting to me, the one where he'd planned to confess everything. Extremely. He'd been talking about making some major changes in his life, getting out from under some obligations that were weighing on him. I thought he meant expanding his business, taking on a partner to reduce his workload. Natalie paused, realizing what those obligations had actually been. He was planning to leave you, wasn't he? That's what the stress was about. I nodded, though hearing it confirmed still stung. I found a draft letter he'd written to me. He was going to tell me about you and Emma after the holidays. He said he felt trapped by his own lies, but was ready to face the consequences of his choices. The irony was devastating. Ryan had died just weeks before he would have destroyed both our lives with the truth, leaving us to discover his deception in the worst possible way. His heart attack had spared him from having to face either of us with his betrayal, but it had left us to deal with the aftermath alone. Natalie broke down crying as the full reality settled over her. I keep wondering what would have happened if he'd lived. Would he actually have gone through with leaving you? Or would he have kept making excuses and promises while Emma and I waited for a life that was never going to happen? Her tears triggered my own, and we sat in her living room crying together for completely different reasons while baby Emma slept peacefully between us. Natalie was grieving the future she'd lost, the family she'd thought they were building, the man she'd believed was completely hers. I was mourning the years I'd spent married to someone who was essentially a stranger, the trust that had been systematically eroded without my knowledge, the life I'd thought was solid but had actually been built on quicksand. What happens now? Natalie asked when we'd both composed ourselves. Legally, I mean. With the estate and Emma's needs. I shared what I'd learned from Margaret Summers about the complex legal situation we were facing. Natalie's expression grew increasingly worried as I explained the potential complications with asset division and insurance policies. The apartment lease was in both their names, but she couldn't afford the rent on her own. Her job at a marketing firm provided decent income, but not enough to cover childcare and all the expenses of single parenthood. I'm not going to fight you for money that's rightfully yours, Natalie said firmly. I don't want to profit from this situation any more than I already have inadvertently. But Emma is his daughter, and she deserves some security for her future. Her dignity in an impossible situation impressed me. She could have been calculating or demanding, could have emphasized Emma's legitimate claim to Ryan's estate in ways that would have made me defensive. Instead, she was trying to navigate the situation with as much grace as possible while protecting her daughter's interests. We need to work together on this, I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Fighting each other only benefits the lawyers and hurts both of us. Emma is innocent in all of this, and she shouldn't suffer because of her father's choices. Over the following weeks, Natalie and I developed an unlikely partnership born of shared betrayal and mutual respect. We met regularly to coordinate our legal responses and share information about Ryan's finances. The process of investigating his affairs revealed even more deception than we'd initially realized. He'd taken out personal loans to fund his double life, loans that I'd unknowingly co-signed for through our joint accounts. The financial picture grew bleaker with each discovery. Ryan's real estate business was struggling more than he'd admitted to either of us, and several deals he'd claimed were in progress had never actually materialized. The stress of maintaining two households on a declining income had apparently contributed to the health problems that led to his heart attack. He'd been living beyond his means for months, borrowing against future earnings that weren't guaranteed. My grief transformed into something harder and more complicated. I found myself angry not just about the betrayal, but about the financial irresponsibility that had jeopardized both our futures. Ryan had made choices that affected not just his own life, but the security of both women who'd trusted him and the innocent child, who would bear the consequences of his deception for years to come. The house I'd thought was my sanctuary began to feel like a monument to lies. Every room held memories that I now questioned, every shared moment tainted by the knowledge that Ryan's attention had been divided between two lives. I started avoiding the bedroom we'd shared, sleeping instead on the living room couch, unable to rest in a space that had been contaminated by deception. Work became my refuge, the one place where my identity hadn't been completely upended by Ryan's revelations. My colleagues had been respectful about my grief, giving me space to process what they assumed was normal bereavement. The irony was that focusing on design projects and client deadlines felt more authentic than anything in my personal life had for months. At least at my job, people were who they claimed to be, and projects were what they appeared to be. Lauren had been my constant support through the worst of the revelations, but even she struggled to understand the complexity of my emotions. "Are you angry or sad?" she asked one evening as we shared wine and take-out Chinese food in my kitchen. "Because honestly, I can't tell anymore, and I don't think you can either." She was right. Grief and rage and relief were all tangled together in ways that made it impossible to process any single emotion cleanly. I was sad about losing the marriage I'd thought I had, angry about the deception and financial damage, relieved to understand why I'd felt so disconnected from Ryan in recent months, and guilty about feeling relief when someone had died. The emotions shifted constantly, sometimes within the span of a single conversation. "I think I'm mostly angry at myself," I admitted to Lauren. For not seeing what was right in front of me, for accepting his explanations when my instincts were telling me something was wrong, for being so passive in my own marriage that he felt comfortable lying to me for 2 years. Lauren set down her wine glass and looked at me seriously. "Claire, you trusted someone you loved. That's not a character flaw, it's what people do in healthy relationships. Ryan was the one who chose deception. Don't let his betrayal make you blame yourself for being a trusting partner." Her words made sense intellectually, but emotionally I struggled with questions about my own culpability. Had I been so absorbed in my career that I'd stopped paying attention to my husband? Had our marriage been lacking in ways that drove him to seek connection elsewhere? Was I partly responsible for creating the conditions that made his betrayal possible? The legal proceedings dragged on for months, each revelation bringing new complications. Ryan had indeed taken out a second life insurance policy with Natalie as the beneficiary, though for a smaller amount than mine. There were business debts I hadn't known about, tax implications that required professional consultation, and asset valuations that changed our understanding of his estate's actual value. Through it all, Natalie and I maintained our unlikely alliance. We shared legal costs where possible, coordinated our attorneys, efforts to avoid duplication, and made decisions based on what was practical rather than what was emotionally satisfying. She never demanded more than Emma's fair share, and I never tried to deny the baby's legitimate claim to her father's estate. Slowly, a new reality took shape. The house would need to be sold to pay debts and divide assets fairly. My portion of the life insurance and estate settlement would be enough to start over, though not in the comfortable style I'd grown accustomed to. Natalie would receive enough to provide basic security for Emma's future, though she'd still need to work full-time to support them both. As winter turned to spring, I realized that dismantling Ryan's deception had become a full-time job. Every day brought new paperwork, phone calls with attorneys, meetings with financial advisors, and decisions about assets I'd never known existed. The process was exhausting and emotionally draining, but it was also clarifying. For the first time in months, I had a sense of purpose and direction, even if that direction was simply away from the wreckage of my marriage. The house sold quickly in Portland's competitive market, and suddenly I was facing a deadline that felt both terrifying and liberating. I had 60 days to decide where to go and what to do next. The life I'd built in Portland was too connected to Ryan's lies to feel like home anymore, but starting over at 31 felt both daunting and full of possibility. One evening, as I sat in boxes in what had been our living room, I realized that for the first time since finding that photograph in Ryan's coat pocket, I felt something resembling excitement about the future. The betrayal had stolen my past, but it had also freed me from a life that had been built on false foundations. I was no longer mourning what I'd lost. I was beginning to anticipate what I might find. The Denver skyline appeared through my windshield like a promise of possibility as I drove east on Interstate 70, the Rocky Mountains growing larger in my rearview mirror with each mile. My Honda Civic was packed with everything I'd decided to keep from my Portland life: 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of books, my laptop and design equipment, and a small collection of photographs that predated Ryan's betrayal. Everything else had been sold, donated, or left behind, as part of a life I was determined to reinvent completely. I'd chosen Denver almost randomly, drawn by job listings in the marketing and design sector, and the appeal of living somewhere with no memories attached to my marriage. The city felt manageable compared to places like New York or Los Angeles, but large enough to offer opportunities and anonymity in equal measure. Most importantly, it was far enough from Portland that I wouldn't risk running into reminders of Ryan's deception around every corner. The apartment I'd rented sight unseen was in the Highland neighborhood, an area the rental agent had described as up-and-coming, with a mix of young professionals and longtime residents. The building was a converted warehouse with exposed brick walls and large windows that faced west toward the mountains. My one-bedroom unit was on the 3rd floor, accessible only by stairs, but the rent was reasonable and the location put me within walking distance of coffee shops, restaurants, and a light rail station that connected to downtown Denver. Moving day consisted of carrying my belongings up 3 flights of stairs in the August heat, a process that took less than 2 hours and left me sitting on the hardwood floor of my empty apartment wondering what came next. The space felt cavernous compared to how much stuff I actually owned, but also liberating in its simplicity. For the first time in years, every object around me was something I'd chosen to keep, something that represented who I wanted to be rather than who I'd been forced to become. I spent my first week in Denver walking through different neighborhoods, getting familiar with the city's layout and rhythm. The downtown area bustled with business activity during the day but quieted significantly in the evenings. The art district offered galleries and studios that reminded me of interests I'd set aside during my marriage, when Ryan's social preferences had steered us towards sports bars and networking events related to his real estate business. The food scene was diverse and unpretentious, with food trucks and casual restaurants that felt welcoming to someone eating alone. Job hunting proved more challenging than I'd anticipated. My graphic design portfolio was solid, but most of my recent work had been for small businesses in Portland, and the Denver market seemed more competitive and sophisticated. Several interviews ended with feedback that my experience, while extensive, didn't align with what companies were seeking in terms of digital marketing integration and social media strategy. The feedback stung initially, but I recognized it as an opportunity to expand my skill set in directions that genuinely interested me. After 3 weeks of rejections and near misses, I walked into Mountain View Marketing Agency for what I hoped would be a more promising interview. The agency occupied 2 floors of a renovated building in the River North Art District, with an open floor plan that buzzed with creative energy. Employees worked at standing desks, surrounded by inspiration boards and prototype displays, and the overall atmosphere felt collaborative rather than hierarchical. Diana Foster, the creative director who interviewed me, was a woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of confidence that comes from years of successful project management. She reviewed my portfolio with genuine interest, asking specific questions about my design choices and problem-solving approaches that demonstrated she understood the creative process from the inside out. "Your technical skills are strong, but what interests me most is your attention to narrative structure," Diana said, pointing to a branding project I'd completed for a Portland nonprofit. "You understand that effective design tells a story, not just about the product, but about the relationship between the brand and its audience. That's surprisingly rare in candidates with your level of experience." The conversation shifted from interview to consultation as Diana showed me some of the agency's current challenges. They were struggling to develop cohesive campaign strategies for clients who wanted to reach multiple demographic groups without diluting their core message. The projects she described sounded complex and engaging, exactly the kind of work that would push me to grow professionally while contributing something meaningful. "I should mention that this isn't a traditional graphic design position," Diana explained. "We're looking for someone who can work across multiple disciplines: visual design, content strategy, client relations, and project coordination. The learning curve would be steep, but the growth potential is significant for someone willing to embrace the challenge." The position paid slightly less than I'd been making in Portland, but included healthcare benefits, professional development opportunities, and the chance to work on campaigns for clients ranging from local restaurants to national outdoor gear companies. More importantly, it felt like a genuine fresh start, rather than simply a continuation of work I'd already mastered. Diana offered me the job the next day, with a start date the following Monday. I accepted immediately, then spent the weekend shopping for professional clothes that reflected the person I wanted to become rather than the person I'd been. The woman who looked back at me from dressing room mirrors seemed more confident than I felt, but I was learning that sometimes confidence could be practiced until it became authentic. Mountain View Marketing Agency operated with the kind of collaborative intensity I hadn't experienced since college. Projects moved quickly from concept to execution, with team members contributing expertise across traditional boundaries. My graphic design background proved valuable, but Diana had been right about the learning curve. Within my first month, I was researching target demographics, attending client strategy sessions, and contributing to campaign development in ways that stretched my skills and perspective. My cubicle neighbor was Marcus Thompson, a business strategy consultant who worked with the agency on a contract basis. He was a few years older than me, with an easy laugh and the kind of practical wisdom that comes from having started and sold 2 small businesses before turning 35. Marcus had a gift for translating complex market research into actionable strategies, and he seemed genuinely interested in teaching others rather than hoarding knowledge for competitive advantage. "You're picking this up faster than most people who've been doing it for years," Marcus commented after I'd presented research findings for a campaign targeting millennial outdoor enthusiasts. "Have you considered that your design background gives you an intuitive understanding of audience psychology that most marketers have to learn through trial and error?" His observation made me realize how much my previous work had prepared me for this transition in ways I hadn't recognized. Understanding visual communication meant understanding how people processed information and made emotional connections with brands. The skills were transferable. I just needed to learn the language and methodologies that marketing professionals use to achieve similar goals. Marcus became my informal mentor during those first months, sharing resources about consumer behavior research and introducing me to industry publications that expanded my understanding of integrated marketing strategies. Our collaboration on projects felt natural and productive, with his strategic thinking complementing my visual and narrative instincts in ways that produced better results than either of us achieved working alone. The agency culture encouraged after-work socializing, and gradually I found myself joining colleagues for happy hour drinks or weekend hiking expeditions in the foothills surrounding Denver. The social connections felt tentative initially. I was still learning to trust my own judgment about people, but slowly I began to develop friendships based on shared interests and mutual respect, rather than the couple-focused social dynamics that had defined my Portland social life. Lauren visited for a long weekend in October, and I was surprised by how different I felt showing her around my new city compared to how I'd felt during our last conversations in Portland. The confident, enthusiastic person who gave her a tour of my neighborhood and introduced her to my new colleagues seemed like someone I was still getting to know, but someone I genuinely liked. "You seem lighter," Lauren observed as we hiked a trail in Golden that offered spectacular views of the valley below. "Like you've finally stopped carrying something heavy that you didn't even realize was weighing you down." She was right, though I hadn't been able to articulate the change so clearly. The constant vigilance I'd lived with during the last months of my marriage, the sense that something was fundamentally wrong that I couldn't identify or address, had disappeared completely. In Denver, I trusted my own perceptions again because there was nothing hidden to discover, no deception to navigate around. Work projects became increasingly complex and rewarding as Diana recognized my growing competence and began assigning me more challenging accounts. I developed campaigns for a craft brewery looking to expand beyond Colorado, a sustainable clothing company targeting environmentally conscious consumers, and a tech startup that needed to explain complex software solutions in accessible terms. Each project taught me something new about market research, consumer psychology, and the art of persuasive communication. Marcus and I were assigned to work together on a major campaign for a client launching a line of outdoor gear specifically designed for women. The project required extensive research into female outdoor enthusiasts, purchasing decisions, and brand loyalty factors, along with developing marketing messages that acknowledged women's authentic experiences rather than simply adapting campaigns that had been designed for men. Our research phase involved conducting focus groups with women who participated in hiking, climbing, camping, and trail running. The conversations were fascinating, revealing gaps between what outdoor gear companies assumed women wanted and what they actually prioritized when making purchasing decisions. The participants spoke eloquently about the importance of functionality over fashion, the frustration of being marketed to through pink-washed versions of men's products, and their desire to be represented as serious athletes rather than casual hobbyists. "This is exactly the kind of work I used to dream about doing," I confided to Marcus one evening as we reviewed focus group transcripts in the agency's conference room. Understanding what people actually need and helping companies respond authentically rather than just selling them what's convenient to produce. Marcus looked up from the data he was analyzing, and something in his expression made me realize he'd been watching me work with the same attention I'd been paying to consumer behavior patterns. "You've found your calling, haven't you? This isn't just a job for you anymore. It's what you're supposed to be doing." The outdoor gear campaign became a showcase for everything I'd learned about integrated marketing strategy. We developed messaging that spoke to women's actual experiences, designed visual materials that featured athletes of different ages and backgrounds, engaged in genuine outdoor activities, and created content that educated consumers about technical features without talking down to them. The campaign launched in February with immediate positive response from both retailers and consumers. Diana called Marcus and me into her office the day after our campaign won a Regional Marketing Excellence Award. "I've been watching the two of you work together for 8 months now, and what you've accomplished goes beyond individual contribution," she said, settling behind her desk with an expression that suggested an important conversation was about to begin. "You complement each other's strengths in ways that produce results neither of you could achieve independently." She paused, studying our faces before continuing. "The agency is expanding, and we're looking to develop a specialized team focused on authentic marketing for companies that want to build genuine connections with their customers, rather than just driving sales through manipulation or trend chasing. I'd like you both to consider leading that initiative. The promotion would mean increased responsibility, a significant salary bump, and the opportunity to shape the kind of work environment I'd always wanted to be part of. More importantly, it represented recognition that I'd successfully reinvented myself professionally in ways that went far beyond simply changing jobs or locations." Marcus and I spent the next week discussing the opportunity, analyzing what it would mean for our individual career goals, and whether we were ready to take on leadership responsibilities. The conversations revealed how much trust had developed between us over months of collaboration, and also something more personal that neither of us had been ready to acknowledge directly. "Can I ask you something that might be completely inappropriate?" Marcus said one evening as we walked through the art district after finishing dinner at a restaurant we'd discovered near the agency. The setting sun was painting the mountains pink and gold, and the city felt alive with spring energy despite the March chill in the air. "Go ahead," I said, though something in his tone made my pulse quicken. Are you ready to consider that this partnership we've developed might be about more than work? Because I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I don't want to jeopardize what we've built professionally, but I also don't want to pretend I don't feel something more when I'm around you. His honesty was both terrifying and liberating. The last time someone had claimed to care about me, he'd been systematically deceiving me while building a life with someone else. But Marcus had demonstrated his character through months of consistent actions, collaborative decision-making, and respect for my autonomy in ways that felt completely different from my experience with Ryan. "I'm scared," I admitted, stopping beside a sculpture garden that was lit with soft landscape lighting. "Not of you, but of my own judgment. The last time I trusted someone romantically, I was completely wrong about who he was and what he wanted from me." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that, and I want you to know that whatever you decide about the personal aspect, it won't change how I feel about working with you, or the respect I have for what you've accomplished here. You've rebuilt your life in ways that inspire me, and I don't want my feelings to complicate that process." His words reassured me in ways I hadn't expected. This wasn't someone trying to rescue me or complete me or convince me to become someone different to meet his needs. This was a partner who respected my independence and wanted to support my continued growth rather than limit it. "What if we took it slowly?" I suggested. "See how we feel about the personal connection while we're also taking on these new professional responsibilities. If it doesn't work romantically, I need to know we can still be effective colleagues." "That sounds perfect," Marcus agreed, and when he kissed me gently beside the sculpture garden, it felt like a beginning rather than a risk. The new team structure launched that summer, with Marcus and me co-directing a department focused on authentic marketing strategies. Our first major project was developing a comprehensive campaign for a Colorado-based company that produced sustainable outdoor gear using recycled materials. The client wanted to reach environmentally conscious consumers without seeming preachy or exploiting environmental concerns for profit. Working together professionally while exploring a personal relationship required constant communication and boundary setting, but the process felt collaborative rather than complicated. We developed protocols for separating work discussions from personal conversations, and we were both committed to ensuring that our romantic connection enhanced rather than interfered with our professional effectiveness. Diana watched our progress with obvious satisfaction, commenting frequently on the innovative approaches we were bringing to client challenges. The department's success attracted attention from other agencies and potential clients, and by the end of our first year as co-directors, we were being contacted by companies throughout the Western United States who wanted to work with our team. "You two have created something special here," Diana said during our annual review meeting. "The authentic marketing approach is becoming an industry trend, but you were implementing these strategies before anyone else was talking about them. Other agencies are trying to copy what you've built, but they don't understand that authenticity can't be manufactured. It has to be genuine from the start." The recognition felt validating in ways that went beyond professional accomplishment. I'd discovered not just a career I loved, but a way of working that aligned with my values and utilized skills I developed through years of varied experience. The person I'd become in Denver felt more authentic than anyone I'd ever been before, and for the first time since discovering Ryan's deception, I trusted my own judgment completely. Marcus and I celebrated our department's success and our personal milestone of 1 year together by taking a weekend trip to Aspen, where we hiked mountain trails and talked about our hopes for the future. The conversations felt different from any I'd had in previous relationships, focused on how we could support each other's individual growth while building something meaningful together. "I never want to be someone who limits your potential or asks you to compromise your independence," Marcus said as we watched the sunset from a mountain overlook. "What we have works because we both came to it as complete people who chose each other, rather than people who needed each other to feel whole." His words captured exactly what made our relationship feel sustainable, in ways my marriage never had. We were partners who enhanced each other's lives rather than dependencies who might collapse if the relationship ended. The foundation felt solid enough to support whatever we decided to build together. As winter approached, Diana made an announcement that would change everything again. She'd been offered a position as creative director for a major advertising agency in New York, an opportunity too significant to decline. Mountain View Marketing would need new leadership, and the agency's owners were considering several options, including selling to a larger firm or promoting from within. I'm recommending that you and Marcus consider purchasing the agency, Diana told us during a private meeting in December. You've built the most successful department we've ever had. You understand the company culture, and you have the vision to take it in directions that align with where the industry is heading. It would be a significant financial commitment, but I believe you're ready for it. The idea of owning our own agency felt simultaneously exciting and overwhelming. It would require taking on debt, assuming responsibility for employees, livelihoods, and risking the financial security I'd worked so hard to rebuild. But it would also mean complete creative control, the ability to implement our values at every level of the business, and the potential for building something that could impact the industry in meaningful ways. Marcus and I spent weeks researching the financial implications and developing a business plan that would allow us to purchase Mountain View Marketing while maintaining its collaborative culture and expanding the authentic marketing approach that had become our specialty. The process required long conversations about our individual risk tolerance, shared vision for the company's future, and confidence in our ability to lead an organization together. On New Year's Eve, as snow fell softly outside the windows of my Highland neighborhood apartment, Marcus and I made two decisions that would define our future. We agreed to move forward with purchasing the agency, and we decided to move in together, combining our lives personally as we prepared to become business partners in the most comprehensive sense. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked as we signed the initial paperwork that would begin the process of buying Mountain View Marketing. I'm ready to find out, I replied, thinking about how far I'd traveled from the woman who'd found that photograph in Ryan's coat pocket just 2 years earlier. That woman had discovered her life was built on lies. But this woman was about to build something real from the ground up, with a partner who respected her strength and shared her values. The new year stretched ahead of us full of challenges and possibilities I couldn't have imagined when I'd driven into Denver with everything I owned packed into a Honda Civic. But for the first time since leaving Portland, I felt completely confident about the direction I was heading and the person I was choosing to travel with. The first year of owning Summit Creative Solutions tested every skill Marcus and I had developed during our time as employees. The transition from being responsible for one department to overseeing an entire agency meant learning financial management, human resources policies, insurance requirements, and regulatory compliance alongside our existing creative and strategic responsibilities. We spent countless evenings in our shared home office, surrounded by spreadsheets and legal documents, trying to understand the intricacies of running a business while maintaining the quality and culture that had made the agency successful under Diana's leadership. Our initial challenge was retaining the talented team Diana had assembled while implementing our vision for authentic marketing strategies. Several employees had been nervous about the ownership transition, worried that new management might change the collaborative atmosphere or shift focus toward more profitable but less meaningful projects. Marcus and I addressed these concerns through a series of team meetings, where we outlined our plans for growth, while emphasizing our commitment to the values that had attracted us to the agency originally. We're not interested in becoming a typical advertising firm that prioritizes billable hours over creative excellence, I explained during our first all-hands meeting as owners. Our goal is to prove that authentic marketing strategies produce better long-term results for clients, while creating more satisfying work for our team. That means we'll sometimes turn down lucrative projects that don't align with our principles, but it also means the work we do accept will be meaningful and impactful. The team responded positively to our approach, and within 6 months we'd not only retained all existing employees, but had begun recruiting additional talent from other agencies who were attracted to our philosophy. Word spread through Denver's marketing community that Summit Creative Solutions offered opportunities to work on substantive campaigns that required genuine creativity and strategic thinking, rather than simply executing formulaic approaches to brand promotion. Our first major success as owners came through an unexpected source. A representative from REI contacted us after hearing about our outdoor gear campaign from the previous year, asking if we'd be interested in developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for their new initiative promoting outdoor activities among urban communities. The project would require extensive research into barriers that prevented city dwellers from participating in hiking, camping, and other outdoor recreation, along with developing campaigns that addressed practical concerns like transportation, equipment access, and skill development. The REI project aligned perfectly with our expertise and values, offering the chance to work with a respected company on initiatives that would genuinely expand outdoor access, rather than simply selling more products. Marcus led the strategic research phase while I focused on creative development and campaign design. We assembled a diverse team of researchers, copywriters, and designers who brought perspectives from urban communities that outdoor retailers had traditionally overlooked or misunderstood. Our research revealed fascinating insights about urban outdoor recreation barriers. Transportation emerged as a more significant challenge than equipment costs for many potential participants, while social connections and mentorship were crucial factors in helping newcomers develop confidence for outdoor activities. These findings shaped a campaign strategy that emphasized community building and skill sharing alongside product promotion, creating content that educated and inspired, rather than simply advertising gear and destinations. The REI campaign launched across multiple markets simultaneously, featuring real urban outdoor enthusiasts sharing their experiences and advice rather than professional athletes demonstrating extreme activities. We developed partnerships with local outdoor organizations, public transportation systems, and community centers to address the practical barriers our research had identified. The campaign's success exceeded everyone's expectations, generating increased participation in REI's urban outdoor programs and establishing Summit Creative Solutions' reputation for research-driven authentic marketing. Industry recognition followed quickly. Marketing publications featured articles about our innovative approach to outdoor recreation marketing, and speaking invitations began arriving from conferences and professional associations. Marcus and I found ourselves positioned as thought leaders in authentic marketing strategies, consulted by other agencies, and invited to share our methodologies with marketing graduate programs at local universities. The success brought new challenges as demand for our services grew faster than our ability to expand the team responsibly. We received inquiries from companies throughout the western United States, many offering retainer agreements that would have doubled our revenue, but required us to scale up rapidly, without compromising the quality and personal attention that distinguished our work. Marcus and I spent months debating expansion strategies, ultimately deciding to grow methodically while maintaining our standards rather than pursuing maximum profitability. We could hire 20 people tomorrow and take on every project that's been offered to us, Marcus said during one of our late-night planning sessions. But that would mean becoming the kind of agency we specifically didn't want to be, one where junior employees handle client relationships, while senior people focus primarily on business development rather than creative work. His perspective matched my own instincts about sustainable growth. We chose to expand selectively, adding team members who shared our commitment to authentic marketing, while turning down projects that would have required compromising our principles or overextending our resources. The approach meant slower revenue growth than some competitors achieved, but it preserved the culture and quality that had attracted clients to us originally. By the end of our second year as owners, Summit Creative Solutions employed 15 people and maintained waiting lists for both employment opportunities and client engagements. Our reputation for thorough research, creative excellence, and ethical business practices had established us as the preferred agency for companies seeking to build genuine connections with their customers, rather than manipulating consumer behavior through psychological pressure tactics. The personal side of our partnership had evolved alongside our professional success. Marcus and I had developed routines that balanced our business responsibilities with maintaining a healthy relationship, setting boundaries around work discussions during personal time, and ensuring that disagreements about agency decisions didn't spill over into our home life. The process required constant communication and occasional adjustments, but the foundation of mutual respect and shared values made most challenges manageable. Our engagement happened during a weekend hiking trip to Rocky Mountain National Park, where Marcus proposed beside an alpine lake that reflected snow-capped peaks in its still surface. The ring he offered was a simple platinum band with a small diamond, elegant and understated in ways that reflected both his taste and his understanding of my preferences. What made the moment perfect wasn't the setting or the ring, but his words about wanting to formalize a partnership that had already transformed both our lives. "I want to marry you not because I need you to complete me, but because what we've built together is more meaningful and joyful than anything I could create on my own," he said, holding my hands while mountain wind rustled through nearby pine trees. "You've taught me that real partnership means supporting each other's individual growth while creating something beautiful together." Our wedding took place the following spring in the sculpture garden where Marcus had first kissed me, with our agency team serving as wedding party and Diana flying in from New York to officiate the ceremony. The celebration was intimate and authentic, reflecting the values we'd cultivated in our business and personal lives. Instead of traditional wedding gifts, guests made donations to organizations promoting outdoor access for urban youth, continuing the community-focused approach that had become central to our identity. The third year of agency ownership brought opportunities that challenged us to think beyond regional markets. A sustainable clothing company based in California approached us about developing a national campaign that would launch their expansion beyond the western United States. The project represented the largest single contract in our agency's history, but it also required capabilities we hadn't developed yet, including coordinating marketing efforts across multiple media markets and managing relationships with national retail partners. Marcus and I spent weeks evaluating whether to pursue the opportunity, recognizing that success could establish Summit Creative Solutions as a national player in authentic marketing, while failure might damage our reputation and financial stability. The decision ultimately came down to our confidence in our team's abilities and our willingness to invest in the resources necessary to execute the campaign effectively. This is exactly the kind of challenge we started the agency to take on, I argued during one of our decision-making conversations. A company with genuine environmental values wanting to expand their positive impact while maintaining authenticity as they scale up. If we're not ready for this now, we may never be ready for projects at this level. We accepted the contract and immediately began assembling the additional expertise required for a national campaign. This meant hiring specialists in media buying, retail partnerships, and regional market analysis, along with upgrading our project management systems and client communication capabilities. The expansion required a significant financial investment and careful coordination to maintain our company culture while integrating new team members. The sustainable clothing campaign became a showcase for everything we'd learned about authentic marketing at scale. Our research revealed that environmentally conscious consumers were increasingly skeptical of corporate environmental claims, requiring marketing messages that demonstrated genuine commitment rather than simply stating good intentions. We developed a campaign strategy that emphasized transparency about manufacturing processes, honest discussions of environmental impact improvements, and partnerships with environmental organizations that provided third-party validation of the company's commitments. The creative execution featured real customers in authentic settings rather than professional models in staged environments. We documented the stories of people who'd chosen sustainable fashion options for practical and ethical reasons, creating content that educated consumers about environmental considerations while showcasing the clothing in realistic contexts. The campaign's success exceeded projections, helping the client expand into new markets while maintaining credibility with environmentally conscious consumers. Industry recognition elevated Summit Creative Solutions to national prominence. Marketing publications featured cover stories about our approach to sustainable brand marketing, and speaking engagements expanded beyond regional conferences to include national industry events and international marketing symposiums. Marcus and I found ourselves consulting with Fortune 500 companies about authentic marketing strategies, while maintaining our commitment to working with smaller businesses whose values aligned with our own. The success brought new pressures and opportunities that required careful consideration. Investment firms began approaching us about acquisition opportunities or funding for rapid expansion, promising resources that could accelerate our growth while potentially compromising our independence. We also received offers to franchise our methodologies through other agencies, licensing our approach to authentic marketing in exchange for ongoing revenue streams. We could become millionaires by selling the agency or licensing our methods, Marcus said during one of our regular strategy discussions. But that would mean giving up control over how our approach gets implemented and whether future work maintains the standards we've established. The conversation reminded me of choices I'd faced throughout my journey from Portland to Denver to business ownership. At each transition, I'd prioritized authenticity and long-term fulfillment over short-term financial gain or external validation. The pattern had led to outcomes more rewarding than anything I could have planned when I first discovered Ryan's betrayal, and I trusted that instinct to guide our current decision-making. We chose to maintain independence while scaling our impact through selective partnerships and strategic hiring. Rather than selling or licensing our approach, we expanded our team's capacity to take on larger projects while launching a professional development program that trained other marketing professionals in authentic strategy methodologies. The approach allowed us to influence industry practices without compromising our control over quality and implementation standards. The fourth year brought personal milestones alongside professional achievements. Marcus and I purchased a house in the Highlands neighborhood, a renovated craftsman bungalow with mountain views and space for the home office we still used for evening strategy sessions. The house represented stability and permanence in ways my Portland home never had. Chosen by two people who understood their individual needs and shared goals, rather than someone trying to build a life with a partner who was fundamentally deceptive. Our team expanded to 25 employees, including specialists in digital marketing, consumer research, environmental communications, and international market development. Summit Creative Solutions occupied an entire floor of a renovated building in the River North Arts District, with workspace design that encouraged collaboration while providing quiet areas for focused creative work. The office culture remained collaborative and supportive, with regular team-building activities and professional development opportunities that kept talented people engaged and growing. Client relationships had evolved from project-based engagements to ongoing strategic partnerships with companies whose growth we supported through multiple campaigns over several years. Our longest-standing clients trusted us to understand their evolving needs and market challenges, consulting with us about business strategy decisions that extended beyond marketing into product development and corporate social responsibility initiatives. The financial success had exceeded every projection Marcus and I had made when we'd first considered purchasing Mountain View Marketing. Agency revenue had grown by over 400% since we'd taken ownership, while profit margins remained strong because our reputation allowed us to command premium pricing for specialized expertise. More importantly, the work remained engaging and meaningful, with each new project offering opportunities to learn about different industries while applying authentic marketing principles in novel contexts. Industry leadership roles began finding us as our reputation for ethical business practices and innovative strategies attracted attention from professional associations and regulatory organizations. I was elected to the board of directors for the Denver Marketing Association, while Marcus accepted an appointment to an industry ethics committee that developed guidelines for responsible advertising practices. These positions provided platforms for advocating for marketing approaches that prioritized consumer welfare alongside business objectives. The 5th anniversary of Summit Creative Solutions coincided with recognition as Denver's Marketing Agency of the Year, an award that acknowledged both our creative excellence and our contribution to raising industry standards for authentic brand communication. The ceremony took place at a downtown hotel ballroom, filled with colleagues, clients, and competitors who had watched our agency grow from a small team with unconventional ideas to a respected industry leader. 5 years ago, Marcus and I took over an agency with 12 employees and a vision for marketing that prioritized authenticity over manipulation. I said during my acceptance speech, "Tonight, we employ 25 talented professionals who prove every day that ethical marketing strategies produce better results for clients while creating more meaningful work for our team." This award recognizes not just our achievements, but the validation of an approach that many people initially considered idealistic or impractical. The recognition felt particularly meaningful because it represented acknowledgement from industry peers who had initially been skeptical of our emphasis on authentic marketing. We'd demonstrated that ethical approaches could be more profitable than traditional manipulation-based strategies, while creating positive outcomes for consumers, businesses, and marketing professionals simultaneously. Looking across the ballroom at our team members celebrating alongside us, I realized how completely my life had been transformed since discovering Ryan's deception. The betrayal that had initially devastated me had ultimately freed me to discover capabilities and create relationships I never could have imagined while trapped in a marriage built on lies. The woman who had found that photograph in a coat pocket had been passive in her own life, accepting explanations that didn't quite make sense because she was afraid to trust her own perceptions. The woman standing at this podium was confident in her judgment, successful through her own efforts, and surrounded by people who valued her contributions and respected her leadership. The success wasn't revenge against those who had underestimated me, but rather proof that authentic relationships and ethical business practices could create outcomes more fulfilling than anything based on deception or manipulation. Summit Creative Solutions had become more than a profitable business. It was a demonstration of values in action, a workplace where talented people could do meaningful work while building financial security for themselves and their families. As Marcus and I danced together at the celebration following the awards ceremony, surrounded by the team and clients who would become our professional family. I felt a contentment that went deeper than any external recognition could provide. We had built something real together, something that reflected our shared commitment to authenticity and excellence, while allowing both of us to grow individually and contribute to our community's economic and cultural vitality. The future stretched ahead, with possibilities I was excited to explore. New client opportunities, potential expansion into additional markets, and the ongoing challenge of maintaining our values while scaling our impact. But most importantly, I knew I was building that future as my authentic self, with a partner who supported my growth and shared my commitment to creating positive change through our work together. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by courier to Summit Creative Solutions, with the kind of formal presentation that suggested significant corporate event planning. The envelope bore the logo of Walsh Development Group, a name that made my coffee cup pause halfway to my lips as memories I'd carefully compartmentalized came rushing back with unexpected force. Inside was an elegant invitation to the company's 20th anniversary gala, celebrating 2 decades of real estate development throughout the Pacific Northwest. The event would take place at Portland's newest luxury hotel, with cocktails, dinner, and awards presentations honoring the company's achievements and community contributions. What caught my attention wasn't the elaborate celebration details, but the small print listing Walsh Development's founding partners, Ryan Walsh and Kevin Rodriguez. I stared at the invitation for several minutes, trying to process the implications. Ryan had been dead for 7 years, yet his company apparently continued operating under his name with his former business partner at the helm. The invitation had been addressed specifically to Summit Creative Solutions, rather than sent through a general marketing list, suggesting that someone at Walsh Development had researched our agency deliberately and chosen to invite us for reasons beyond our Denver location. Marcus found me in my office 20 minutes later, still holding the invitation and staring out the window at the mountains without really seeing them. He'd learned to recognize the distant expression that occasionally crossed my face when something triggered memories of my Portland life, and he approached with the gentle caution of someone who understood that the past sometimes demanded acknowledgement, even when it had been thoroughly processed and resolved. "Everything okay?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk without pressuring me to explain immediately. I handed him the invitation, watching his face as he read the details and made the connections I knew he'd piece together quickly. Marcus had heard the complete story of Ryan's deception and my escape to Denver, though we rarely discussed those events because they felt irrelevant to the life we'd built together. Now, however, the past was reaching across 7 years and 2 states to request our presence at a celebration of the company Ryan had used to fund his double life. "Do you want to go?" Marcus asked after reading the invitation twice, his tone carefully neutral in the way that meant he'd support whatever decision I made while having strong opinions he was keeping to himself. "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "Part of me is curious about what happened to his business after he died, and whether Kevin ever knew about Natalie and Emma. But mostly I'm wondering why they specifically invited our agency when there are dozens of marketing firms closer to Portland." Marcus studied the invitation again, focusing on details I'd missed during my initial emotional reaction. "Look at the RSVP contact information. It's not going through Walsh Development's main office. It's being coordinated by an events company in Portland. Someone wanted you to receive this invitation, but they may have arranged it indirectly to avoid appearing to contact you personally." His observation shifted my perspective from wondering whether to attend to wondering who had engineered our invitation and why. The possibilities were limited but significant. Kevin Rodriguez might have discovered Ryan's deception after his death and wanted to apologize or explain. Natalie could have somehow learned about my success and decided to reach out indirectly. Even my mother or Hannah, my sister, might have heard about Summit Creative Solutions and chosen this elaborate method of reestablishing contact. "What does your instinct tell you?" Marcus asked, recognizing that I needed to process the decision aloud rather than analyze it silently. "That I'm not the same person who left Portland 7 years ago, and maybe it's time to prove that to myself as much as anyone else," I said, surprised by the certainty in my voice. I spent so long running from that betrayal and building something new that I've never actually faced those people as the person I became. Maybe seeing them would provide closure I didn't know I still needed. Marcus nodded slowly. And if it turns out to be some kind of setup or manipulation? Then I'll handle it the way I handled difficult clients or challenging business negotiations, I replied, feeling more confident with each word. I'm not a victim anymore, Marcus. I'm a successful business owner who built something meaningful with my own skills and determination. Whatever their motivation for inviting us, I can respond from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. We decided to attend the gala as a business networking opportunity, approaching it with the same professional preparation we'd bring to any industry event. Marcus would accompany me as both business partner and moral support, and we'd treat the evening as a chance to learn about Pacific Northwest development trends, while satisfying my curiosity about Ryan's legacy and the people who'd shaped my former life. The trip to Portland felt surreal as our plane descended through familiar cloud cover toward an airport I'd left in grief and confusion 7 years earlier. The city skyline had changed significantly, with new construction projects visible from the air that spoke to continued economic growth and development. I wondered if any of those buildings had been developed by Walsh Development Group, and whether Ryan's vision for the company had been realized or abandoned after his death. Our hotel was in the Pearl District, a neighborhood that had been undergoing gentrification when I'd lived in Portland but now appeared fully transformed into an upscale area of converted warehouses and boutique businesses. Walking through streets I'd once known well felt like touring a movie set of my former life, familiar enough to trigger memories but changed enough to feel like someone else's story. The anniversary gala took place in the ballroom of Portland's newest luxury hotel, a building that exemplified the kind of high-end development Ryan had aspired to create. Arriving guests were directed through a registration area displaying photographs and project descriptions that chronicled Walsh Development Group's 20-year history, including several images of Ryan at various company milestones and groundbreaking ceremonies. Seeing his face in those professional photographs triggered a complex emotional response I hadn't anticipated. The man in the pictures looked successful and confident, surrounded by business associates and civic leaders at ribbon-cutting ceremonies and awards presentations. There was no hint of the deception and financial stress that had characterized his final years, no suggestion that he'd been living a double life that would collapse spectacularly upon his death. "You okay?" Marcus asked quietly, staying close as we moved through the registration area toward the main ballroom. It's strange seeing him presented as this accomplished businessman when I know how much of his success was built on lies and financial manipulation, I replied, accepting a cocktail from a passing server and using the moment to compose myself for whatever encounters lay ahead. The ballroom was elegantly decorated in silver and navy, with tables arranged around a dance floor and stage, where presentations would take place later in the evening. Approximately 200 guests mingled over cocktails, representing what appeared to be Portland's real estate development, construction, and civic leadership communities. The atmosphere was celebratory and professional, exactly the kind of event Ryan would have thrived in during his lifetime. I spotted Kevin Rodriguez almost immediately, recognizing him from photographs in Ryan's home office despite the 7 years that had aged him considerably. He was engaged in animated conversation with a group of people I didn't recognize, gesturing enthusiastically as he described what appeared to be a current development project. His energy and enthusiasm suggested that Walsh Development Group had thrived under his leadership, possibly more than it had when Ryan was alive to complicate decision-making with his personal financial pressures. "That's him," I murmured to Marcus, indicating Kevin with a subtle nod. Ryan's business partner. Marcus studied Kevin's interaction with his companions, noting the body language and social dynamics with the analytical skills he'd developed through years of consumer behavior research. "He seems comfortable in a leadership role. I'm guessing he's been running the company successfully since Ryan's death." Our conversation was interrupted by a voice I recognized with a shock of immediate recognition. "Claire? Claire Bennett Walsh?" I turned to find myself face to face with my sister Hannah, who looked remarkably similar to how I remembered her, but with the subtle changes 7 years brings to someone in their 30s. She was impeccably dressed in a way that suggested continued professional success, and her expression combined surprise, uncertainty, and what might have been genuine pleasure at seeing me. "Hannah?" I replied, accepting her tentative embrace while processing the flood of emotions her presence triggered. I didn't expect to see you here. Kevin is a client of my firm, she explained, referencing the law practice she'd built in Portland. When I saw Summit Creative Solutions on the guest list and realized it was your agency, I had to convince him to let me help coordinate the event planning. I hoped you'd accept the invitation. The mystery of our presence was solved, though it raised new questions about Hannah's motivations and what she hoped to accomplish through this orchestrated reunion. Marcus stepped forward with the easy confidence that had made him successful in client relations, extending his hand with a warm smile that didn't reveal any of the protective concern I knew he was feeling. I'm Marcus Thompson, Claire's business partner and husband, he said, emphasizing both relationships in a way that established his importance in my life without seeming confrontational. Hannah's eyes widened slightly at the word, husband, and I realized she'd had no idea I'd remarried. The surprise in her expression suggested she'd imagined I might still be struggling to recover from Ryan's betrayal, rather than having built a completely new life with someone who respected and supported my ambitions. Congratulations, she said, though her tone suggested she was still processing this information. I'm glad you found happiness after everything that happened with Ryan. The casual reference to Ryan's deception surprised me. I'd assumed my family either didn't know about his double life or had chosen to ignore it, rather than acknowledge their role in the breakdown of my marriage. Hannah's matter-of-fact mention suggested a level of awareness and perhaps accountability I hadn't expected. What exactly do you know about what happened with Ryan? I asked directly, deciding that 7 years was long enough for diplomatic conversation. Hannah glanced around the crowded ballroom, recognizing that a detailed discussion would require more privacy than the current setting allowed. Could we talk privately later? There are things about Ryan's situation that I learned after his death, information that I think might give you some closure about why everything happened the way it did. Before I could respond, the evening's program began, with Kevin Rodriguez taking the stage to welcome guests and begin the formal presentations. His speech was polished and engaging, outlining Walsh Development Group's history, while crediting Ryan's vision and Kevin's management for the company's continued success. He spoke about Ryan with respect and obvious affection, describing him as a visionary who'd identified development opportunities others had missed. Ryan Walsh was my partner and my friend for 12 years, Kevin said, looking out over the audience with genuine emotion. His death was a tremendous loss not just for our company, but for Portland's development community and everyone who knew him personally. Tonight we celebrate not just Walsh Development Group's 20 years of success, but Ryan's lasting impact on our city's growth and character. The tribute was touching and professionally appropriate, but I found myself wondering what Kevin actually knew about Ryan's financial pressures and personal complications during his final years. Had Ryan's death come as a complete surprise to his business partner? Or had Kevin been aware of problems that might have indicated deeper issues? During dinner, Marcus and I were seated at a table with other out-of-town guests, including representatives from development firms in Seattle, San Francisco, and Phoenix. The conversation centered on Pacific Northwest real estate trends and sustainable development practices, topics that aligned with our agency's expertise and allowed us to contribute meaningfully to discussions while observing the evening's other interactions. I noticed Natalie Harper almost by accident, recognizing her profile as she moved between tables during the cocktail reception. She looked older and more sophisticated than she had in Ryan's photograph, with shorter hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd navigated single parenthood successfully. A young girl with unmistakable traces of Ryan's facial features stayed close beside her, clearly Emma at 7 years old. The sight of Ryan's daughter triggered emotions I hadn't prepared for. Emma was beautiful and seemed happy, chattering animatedly with Natalie about something that had captured her interest. Seeing them together made Ryan's deception feel simultaneously more real and more distant, a betrayal that had affected not just me and Natalie, but this innocent child who would grow up knowing her father only through other people's memories. That's her, isn't it? Marcus asked quietly, following my gaze to where Natalie and Emma were seated at a table near the front of the room. Natalie and Emma. I nodded, surprised by how little resentment I felt watching them. 7 years ago, discovering their existence had devastated me, but now they simply looked like another family attending a business event, connected to my past but irrelevant to my present circumstances. The emotional distance felt healing rather than cold, evidence of genuine recovery rather than denial or suppression. After dinner, Kevin Rodriguez approached our table with the purposeful stride of someone who'd been planning a conversation all evening. Up close, he appeared nervous despite his confident public presentation, and his handshake lingered slightly as if he was reluctant to begin a discussion he'd been anticipating for hours. "Claire, I'm Kevin Rodriguez. I was Ryan's business partner and I've wanted to speak with you for years," he began, then paused as if uncertain how to continue. "I know this might not be the appropriate time or place, but when Hannah told me you might attend tonight, I realized I needed to take the opportunity to apologize for things you probably don't even know I did wrong." His words suggested knowledge and accountability that went beyond polite condolences about Ryan's death. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair, positioning himself to support me while allowing Kevin space to explain whatever confession or apology he'd been carrying for 7 years. "What exactly are you apologizing for?" I asked, matching his serious tone. Kevin glanced around the ballroom, confirming that nearby conversations would provide privacy for his response. "For loaning Ryan money I knew he couldn't repay, money he used to maintain his relationship with Natalie while lying to you about our company's financial situation. I knew he was in over his head personally and professionally, but I enabled his deception because I was afraid losing him would destroy the business we'd built together." The revelation reframed my understanding of Ryan's final months completely. I'd assumed his financial stress came from trying to support 2 households on his real estate income, but Kevin's confession suggested that business partners and possibly friends had knowingly participated in the web of lies that had sustained Ryan's double life. "You knew about Natalie and Emma?" I asked. I knew Ryan was involved with someone, though I didn't know the full extent of his deception until after his death when the legal complications began. Kevin replied honestly. "I thought he was having an affair that he'd end when he came to his senses, not that he was maintaining a completely separate life and planning to leave you. When I learned the truth, I realized my financial support had made his betrayal possible." Kevin's apology was more comprehensive than I'd expected, acknowledging not just awareness of Ryan's situation, but active participation in enabling the deception. His obvious guilt suggested he'd spent 7 years regretting choices that had seemed reasonable at the time but had contributed to devastating multiple people's lives. "What happened to the money he borrowed?" Marcus asked, focusing on practical implications rather than emotional processing. "I wrote it off as a business loss after Ryan's death," Kevin replied. "Pursuing collection from his estate would have hurt you and Natalie both, and it was my decision to make loans I knew were risky. The company absorbed the loss and moved forward." His response impressed me with its accountability and consideration for the people Ryan's deception had affected. Kevin could have pursued legal remedies that would have complicated the estate settlement Natalie and I had worked so hard to handle fairly, but he'd chosen to accept financial responsibility for his role in enabling Ryan's mistakes. The conversation was interrupted by Hannah's approach, her expression suggesting she'd been monitoring our discussion from across the room and had decided it was time to join us. She introduced herself to Marcus with more composure than she'd shown earlier, then addressed Kevin with the familiarity of established professional relationship. "I see you two have finally had the conversation you've both been avoiding for 7 years," she said, settling into an empty chair at our table. "Kevin, did you tell Claire about the memorial fund?" Kevin looked uncomfortable, clearly preferring to end their discussion rather than introduce new topics. "I wasn't sure it was appropriate to mention tonight." "What memorial fund?" I asked, though part of me was beginning to suspect the answer. Kevin established a fund in Ryan's name that provides outdoor recreation programs for single-parent families. Hannah explained when Kevin hesitated. "It's been operating for 5 years and has helped hundreds of parents and children access camping, hiking, and other activities they couldn't afford otherwise. He created it after learning about Ryan's situation with Natalie and Emma." The memorial fund represented a thoughtful way to honor Ryan's memory while addressing one of the practical challenges his deception had created for his secret family. Kevin had transformed his guilt about enabling Ryan's lies into ongoing support for families facing similar struggles, creating positive outcomes from a situation that had caused significant harm. "That's a meaningful way to address a complicated legacy," I said, genuinely impressed by Kevin's approach to making amends. Ryan would have appreciated knowing his memory was helping families spend time outdoors together. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in conversations with people who'd known Ryan professionally, but had no knowledge of his personal complications. They spoke about his enthusiasm for sustainable development, his mentorship of younger professionals, and his contributions to Portland's affordable housing initiatives. Their memories painted a picture of someone who'd been genuinely committed to positive community impact, even while making destructive personal choices. The contrast between Ryan's professional reputation and his personal betrayal felt less contradictory than it had years earlier. People were complex, capable of ethical behavior in some contexts while making harmful choices in others. Ryan had been a good business partner and community member while being a deceptive husband, and both aspects of his character could be acknowledged without excusing or minimizing either. Near the end of the evening, Natalie approached our table with Emma, who had been waiting patiently for what was clearly a planned introduction. Natalie looked nervous but determined, while Emma seemed curious about meeting people her mother had described as important to her father's memory. "Claire, I've been hoping to speak with you all evening," Natalie said, her voice carefully controlled. "I wanted Emma to meet you, and to thank you for how you handled everything after Ryan's death. Your fairness during the estate settlement made it possible for us to build a stable life, and I've never forgotten that generosity." Emma stepped forward with the polite confidence of a well-raised 7-year-old, extending her small hand for a formal handshake. "Mom says you were married to my dad before I was born, and that you're a very successful businesswoman now. I'm glad to meet you." Meeting Emma felt like closing a circle that had been left open for 7 years. She was bright and articulate, clearly thriving under Natalie's care, and she spoke about her father with affection uncomplicated by knowledge of his deception. Ryan lived on in her memory as the loving parent he'd apparently been during his brief time with her, and that seemed like the most important legacy from their relationship. "I'm glad to meet you too, Emma," I replied, shaking her hand seriously. "Your father would be very proud of the young lady you're becoming." Marcus engaged Emma in conversation about school and her interests, demonstrating the natural ease with children that had made me confident he'd be a wonderful father when we decided to start our own family. Watching him interact with Ryan's daughter felt symbolically significant, representing how completely I'd moved beyond the betrayal to build relationships based on authenticity and mutual respect. As the evening concluded, Hannah approached me one final time with an expression that suggested she had something important to say before we parted ways again. Kevin and Natalie had both said their goodbyes, leaving my sister as the last connection to my Portland past that required resolution. "Claire, I need to tell you something I should have said 7 years ago," Hannah began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I knew something was wrong with Ryan during those final months, but I convinced myself it wasn't my place to interfere in your marriage. I should have trusted my instincts and found a way to warn you, even if it meant risking our relationship." Her admission surprised me less than the fact that she'd carried guilt about it for so many years. Hannah had always been conflict avoidant, preferring to maintain social harmony rather than address uncomfortable truths directly. Her regret about not warning me suggested personal growth that paralleled my own journey toward authenticity and directness. "What made you suspect something was wrong?" I asked, curious about what signs had been visible to outside observers. His behavior at family events became increasingly erratic. He'd be charming and engaged one moment, then distracted and almost hostile the next. He started making excuses to leave early or skip gatherings entirely, and when he did attend, he seemed like he was performing rather than actually participating. Hannah explained, "I thought he might be having work problems or health issues, but the pattern suggested something more personal." Her observations matched my own memories of Ryan's final months, when I'd attributed his mood swings and withdrawal to business stress, without recognizing them as symptoms of someone struggling to maintain an unsustainable deception. Hannah's perspective confirmed that the changes had been obvious enough for family members to notice, validating my instincts about our relationship deteriorating even when I couldn't identify the cause. "I appreciate you telling me," I said honestly, "but even if you'd warned me, I'm not sure I would have been ready to hear it. Sometimes people need to discover things for themselves in order to process them completely." Hannah smiled with what appeared to be relief and genuine happiness. "You seem incredibly content, Claire." The life you've built with Marcus looks authentic in ways that your marriage with Ryan never quite achieved, even before we knew about his deception. I'm sorry it took betrayal to free you, but I'm glad you found your way to something real. Her words provided unexpected closure to the evening and to my relationship with my Portland past. Hannah's recognition of my current happiness, combined with her acknowledgement of what had been missing in my marriage with Ryan, felt like permission to fully embrace the life I'd created without carrying lingering doubts about what I might have lost or missed. The flight back to Denver the next morning felt like a journey from past to future, rather than simply a return trip. Marcus and I spent the flight processing the evening's conversations and their implications for understanding the people and events that had shaped my transformation from passive victim to confident business owner. "How do you feel about seeing everyone again?" Marcus asked as our plane climbed above the clouds that had covered Portland during our descent the previous day. "Grateful," I replied, surprised by the accuracy of that single word. Grateful that Ryan's betrayal led me to Denver. Grateful that his death spared everyone from more complicated pain. Grateful that Kevin and Hannah found ways to make amends for their roles in the situation, and most of all, grateful that I became someone strong enough to face all of them as an equal, rather than someone seeking their approval or forgiveness. The Portland Gala had provided closure I hadn't realized I still needed, confirming that the woman who'd fled the city in grief and confusion had evolved into someone capable of handling complex emotional situations with grace. The people who'd once seemed so important to my happiness had become footnotes in a story whose most meaningful chapters were still being written in Denver, with Marcus and our team at Summit Creative Solutions. Returning to our office the following Monday, I felt recharged and focused in ways that reminded me why I had originally been drawn to marketing work that emphasized authenticity over manipulation. The Portland experience had reinforced my commitment to building honest relationships and creating value through genuine service rather than deception or exploitation of others. Vulnerabilities. Summit Creative Solutions continued growing over the months that followed, expanding into new markets while maintaining the ethical standards and collaborative culture that had distinguished us from larger agencies focused primarily on profitability. The success felt sustainable because it was built on solid foundations of mutual respect, honest communication, and shared commitment to creating positive outcomes for everyone involved in our projects. Marcus and I celebrated our third wedding anniversary by announcing our first pregnancy, a development that felt like the natural next chapter in a life we'd built deliberately and thoughtfully together. The baby would grow up in a home where both parents had chosen each other as complete individuals, rather than seeking someone to fill emotional voids or complete their identities. Looking back on the journey from Ryan's betrayal to my current happiness, I recognized how perfectly his deception had served my ultimate well-being, despite the pain it had caused initially. The woman who trusted her lying husband would never have developed the strength and independence necessary to build Summit Creative Solutions, or maintain an equal partnership with someone as accomplished as Marcus. Ryan's betrayal had forced me to discover capabilities I might never have developed otherwise, creating opportunities for growth and success that exceeded anything my comfortable Portland life could have provided. The coat pocket that had revealed Ryan's double life had actually contained the key to my freedom, though it had taken 7 years to fully understand and appreciate that gift. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most authentic achievements, and sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted creates space for discovering what you actually needed to become the person you were meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.